So, just this time of the year, getting to the end of the year, and just this kind of message popped into my heart, and I say this because we have sort of standalone messages through November. I know it's a crazy time for everybody. Kids run exams and students, and end of the year deadlines are looming, and so it's a busy time of the year. And just to mention as well that there'll be a few of us who will be down with Tristan this coming weekend at Sunrise Church. He has a nucleus now of about 30-40 core people, which is wonderful from a start in around March when he planted his church. And so that's going really well. And we want to carry on that good relationship that we have with him. He's obviously part of our Immerse network as well. And so I'm down for Immerse meetings for next year. Just looking at next year, then staying on. There's a small team coming down just to minister with Sunrise Church. And Tristan, we will be sure to send our greetings. And always good to partner with Trist, and so just pray for us, and looking forward to that. And then, it's into December, eh? My word. So I want to talk this morning, just this dropped into my heart, this around building faith that lasts. Building a faith that lasts, whether it's for you, whether it's for yourself and your spouse, your partner, whether it's into your family, and we'll talk a bit about families today, in your children and the legacy that you leave. We're all building faith at some level, where we're not just playing religious games or doing religious stuff like coming to church and we pray and we read our word and that kind of thing and kind of hang in there until we get to heaven. No, we're building faith. We're building a faith, a relationship with the Lord that lasts in good times and bad, that can overcome when we have to weather the storm, where we don't fall away, where we're going to hold on to truth, and we're going to build faith that, as Jesus said, when the storms come, the house stands. The house stands. But in order for the house to stand, sometimes we've got to do some things, and a house that has a solid foundation, a tree that has deep roots, is more likely to last, especially when the storms come, than one that has shallow roots. So I want us to talk a little bit around roots this morning, and I want to draw from the Old Testament, but just to share kind of where we're going. The last 20 years or so, there's been a kind of a movement, a trend that many have observed in the church, particularly in the Western world, and that is that people are leaving church at an alarming rate. Within these surveys done, there have been extensive studies done throughout Europe and Americas and so on. They found one interesting one that I just would highlight for us today, and that is that of this group leaving church, and in many cases leaving the faith as well, never to return, they've estimated, all these different surveys come out at this kind of range, that 65 to 66% to 75% of children who grew up in church, or young people that came into a youth group and got saved and so on. So in other words, children, youth that grew up in church, 65% to 75% of them will not be in church by age 30. That is a staggering statistic. Of course, then, we all want to figure out why. What's going on? Why are people, young people, they're growing up in the faith, many of them with Christian parents and so on, and they get to varsity or they get into the adult world and so on. And yes, you are then moving away from your parents' faith to forge your own faith, but for some reason along the line, church just isn't the place they want to be. And often related to that is a faith in God no longer seems to work for them. That is a staggering statistic. And of course, we want to ask ourselves, why is this happening? So to put that in numbers, easy numbers, 2 out of every 3 or 3 out of every 4 young people, either at Firehouse today or children in our children's church, may potentially not be around in church or faith by age 30. So what are we going to do about that? I've been thinking about that. Just these few thoughts dropped into my heart, and there are probably many reasons. I want to suggest one. That's probably a key reason, because here's what's interesting. Among devout Jewish folks and devout Muslims, just by comparison, the fallout rate is nothing near that. In fact, it's minuscule. It's like around 10%. So of those in Judaism, children and youth in Judaism, and I'm not talking about the culture. I'm not talking about the culture of Islam. I'm talking about those that would go to synagogue, those that would be part of a mosque and so on. Just by comparison, So when they are of age, where they're moving away from their parents and they're establishing their own home and that kind of thing, they still stay in the faith. They still stay in the faith. Why is that? Why is that? When we as Christians find such an alarming drop-off rate. So again, there are many reasons. Church becomes boring or whatever. But here's one that I think is important, often overlooked, and that is the roots run deep. The roots run deep. And when roots run deep, the chances are we're going to then build a strong, firm tree on those roots that are going deep into the soil. Or use the analogy of a house where the foundation is strong. Where the foundation is strong. And part of that strength of foundation and roots come through the rituals and the days and the shared celebrations and moments that those faiths have together. That often as Christians we think, well, coming to church is optional, really. It's a lovely day outside. There are other options for us, like the beach or family gathering or whatever. Do you see where I'm going with this? Sometimes our roots as Christians are a lot shallower than they should be. And then we wonder why there's such a fallout rate. Or when young people grow up and they go, this doesn't really work for me. Why wouldn't it work for you? Why would it not? We're serving the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the true and living God. Why would it no longer work for you? Unless your roots are too shallow. Unless your roots are shallow and the foundation is weak and there are other temptations that are going to draw you and pull you away. So let's have a look at the Old Testament. Let's have a look at the roots of Judaism. Don't blame me. This just popped into my heart this week. And I just felt it would be good for us to talk around these things. Because it is true that even today, that those devout Jewish families and so on remain devout through the generations. And they raise their children don't easily depart from that. Then maybe there's something that we often overlook in the foundation of Judaism in the Old Testament and so on. The danger, of course, is that as Christians, Old Testament, that was all fulfilled in Christ. We don't have to bother too much with that anymore. I'll never forget one of my lecturers at college, Bible college, he said this, we dismiss the law, we don't read Leviticus, all those laws don't apply to us anymore. That's true. But he said this, he said, behind every law is the heart of God. Behind every law that God gave his people was the heart of a father for their well-being. Every law. Now you're going to read the law, go and read Leviticus with that in mind. Behind every law was the heart of God for his children's well-being, for his nation's well-being. So we don't want to just chuck it out. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy. We're going to look at a passage in Deuteronomy. Just felt led there. There are many aspects we could cover today, but I just want to cover a few that I think will be helpful and very practical. So a lot of it, let me just be honest and upfront to say they are sort of my ideas around this, so don't shoot me on that. But just take it and process it. If it works for you, we want to look at what is the principle then, the heart of God behind some of these regulations that he gave to his people. So in Deuteronomy chapter 15 and 16, that's what we're going to focus on this morning. In Deuteronomy 15 and 16, there are a whole lot of, as is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a renewal of the law. So it's basically like, you remember Leviticus was given, covers most of the law. Deuteronomy is written now right before the Israelites are going to enter the promised land. So although they're written by inspiration by Moses in a set, Deuteronomy is given to the nation, the people that were born in the desert, to now go and occupy the land. So it's a parallel, if you like, of Leviticus. And so there are a whole lot of laws and regulations. I want us to look at these, and then what is the principle that we could apply in our lives that builds faith, that causes us, as God intended, to allow the roots, not only in our own life, but in the life of those around us, in our families, in our children, to go deep and remain strong through the seasons of life. So in Deuteronomy chapter 15, we read, if you've got a title in your Bible there, you'll see the year of cancelling debts. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel the loan he has made to his fellow Israelite. He shall not require payment from his fellow Israelite. Now, what that went on was then there were these sequences of cancelling debts. And it found its fulfillment after 49 years, remember, the year of Jubilee, where nationally there was a cancelling of debts and settling what was owed and so on. Why was that? So people didn't end up in bondage. You didn't end up exploiting people, and people did not end up in bondage. It allowed the people to recover, to be free And so these were built into the law. We're not under the law anymore, but there's a principle that if we overlook, we could miss the heart of God. Of course, we're not going back to these laws, but we don't want to miss the principle that God might have for the well-being of his people. Then it goes on in let's go further down to verse 12. If a fellow Hebrew, a man or a woman, sells himself to you and serves you 6 years as a servant or a slave, in the 7th year, you must let him go free. And when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor and your winepress. Give him as the Lord God has blessed you. Why? Because remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. Later on, it goes on and says in verse 18, at the end there, and the Lord your God will bless you in everything that you do when you do this. Interesting, huh? Then in chapter 16, verse 1, observe the month of Abib and celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God, because in the month of Abib he brought you out of Egypt by night. Sacrifice as the Passover to the Lord your God, an animal from your flock or herd at the place the Lord will choose as his dwelling place for his name. There's the Passover. Later on, we're going to get back to this and just do a deep dive into some of these verses. Verse 9. Count off 7 weeks from the time that you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. That's obviously the harvest. And then celebrate the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God by giving a freewill offering in proportion to the blessings the Lord has given you. So this happened at the end of the harvest. And so they would cut down the harvest and they would bring that offering. They'd bring that offering to the Lord. It's a Thanksgiving offering, which coincides with Pentecost. And rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. Isn't that interesting? So now we have all these commands and these laws to do this and to do that, and we go, well, we're not under obligation to do that anymore, obviously. However, there's a principle. There's a principle there, or there are principles throughout the law that build faith into our lives, into our marriage, into our children as a legacy. And let's have a look at them. I've just sort of collated them into 3, and that help us. Firstly, the principle of caring for others. Caring for others. So it talks, remember, at the start of chapter 15, we talked about canceling debts. There's canceling debts. There's letting a servant or a slave go free. That would have been quite radical, quite challenging when we look at it like that. But in that society, that's what they were expected to do. That is what they were expected to do, so that you could minimize exploitation and maximize people at least being able to eke out a living and live, even if they were a slave or a servant or they owed money and so on. I think it's so interesting that the Lord puts there, he says there in verse, I will bless you when you do this. The parallel then, or the contrary then, would also be true, that the Lord would withhold his blessing when we don't do this. So what is the principle? The principle then in building faith is to constantly have an awareness of caring for others, of looking out for the needs of others. So in these times, little Levi, living in the Promised Land, would have come back from school somewhere, living there in the Promised Land outside Jericho, and he comes home and he sees that his room that was always tidy for him is a mess. All his clothes are lying on the floor, they haven't been picked up and they haven't been washed, and all these Legos lying there, and he wants to know, where's Martha? She always comes in on a Thursday. Where's Martha to clean up my room? His mother says, we've let her go. Well, who's going to clean up my room? Prevents bratish behavior. Got to clean up his own room. You know why? Because we've let Martha go. Because the Lord God instructed us that after 6 years, and it just so happens that 6 years are up, she's able to go back to her family, and they live far away from here, maybe, and we're allowing her to go back. And Dad's given her a gift to see her on her way, and we are baking some bread or whatever it is. Maybe you'd like to write Martha a letter of thanks for cleaning your dirty room. That was the idea. That's the idea. See, built into Israelite society was then an awareness of the needs of others, because Martha presumably wasn't as wealthy, or her family wasn't as wealthy as Levi's family. Why else would she be working for them? So built into that culture was then an awareness of and a care for the poor. I would suggest to you, the principle here, is that we want to build faith in our own lives, and we want to build faith in our families. then we need an awareness of and a caring for those around us, those that are needy, those that are less fortunate. And the reason why I give you that little illustration of Levi and so on, because it started in the home. This wasn't something that happened in the synagogue. This wasn't something that happened in the tabernacle. This wasn't something that happened in the temple. This happened in the home. In fact, all of this happened in the home. This happened in the home. The rabbi didn't come and do all this. The parents did this. And they modeled something for their children. I think there's something so powerful in that, in living in such a way that we model for our children how to care for others. It builds faith. It builds faith. I'm always so proud and grateful when I hear, over the years, I've heard of so many of you that look after your domestic work and their families, and you do it so well. Put their children through school, pay for their school fees and their uniforms, and that's what we should be doing. And when you do that, you model something for your children. Don't be shy to talk about it, not in a bragging way, but this is what we do as Christians. This is what we do as Christians. I think it's been great in recent years to have families go on mission trips. Parents have taken their children to Lesotho and to India. And going into the future, I want to do a lot more shorter term, like just for a weekend, somewhere close. To go as a family. Those children are impacted without fail. Impacted powerfully. And they go and minister to children a lot less, and other children and families a lot less fortunate than they are. You build something. We build something into our lives and into our children when we care for those less fortunate. It's just how God has destined it to be. It's just how He has planned it to be. So we can not, it's all Old Testament, we don't, we'll just do it when we think of, or you can build it into your life. You can build it into your life to say, this is what we're going to do. Christmas time. This is a good message this time of the year. Christmas time's coming. I would challenge you, urge you, to look for an opportunity. Oh, we just went dark, eh? No. I would urge you this Christmas time to look for an opportunity that you can do as a family, irrespective of what we as a church might be doing, and I will let you know of opportunities. Go along as a family. Go along as a family and go and do something. Make a love box together. It's that simple. Why are we doing a love box, Dad? Tell them why. Tell them why. So there are so many opportunities that we have to build faith, roots that are deep in ourselves and those around us, in our families. And by extension, then, our church family, when we do that. Because we can. And because God blesses that. Because God blesses that. Isn't that part of training up a child in the way that they should go? It's part of training up a child. It's not just cramming Bible verses down their throat. It's modeling for them something. And it's a life worth living, because we know it is so much better to give than to receive. We want to model something that's worthy and valuable, that it is better to give than to receive. You know that. I know that. And we want our children to know that. So we build deep roots. We build a good foundation. We send down deep roots when we care for others. We're in the law for a reason. We're not under any law, but we do it gladly. We do it gladly for the King. And that's the difference, obviously, in the new covenant. The second opportunity we have to build faith, to send down deep roots, is to anchor your faith. What I mean by anchor your faith, it goes on to talk about the Passover. The Passover, along with the Day of Atonement, were the two most sacred days and most meaningful days, still to this day, in Jewish religion and culture. They do not miss those days. Those days are important. And the Passover, being the significant deliverance from Egypt, and it was always meant for them to be reminded of that deliverance that God made for them. And of course, Jesus comes on the Passover weekend. He dies the very time when the sacrificial lambs were being sacrificed and eaten all over Israel at the time. And it is through the Passover that the new covenant in His blood is born. So the Passover is a deeply significant moment. Again, I know we do communion in church. It didn't start out in church. It started out in an upper room, Jesus just having a meal with His disciples. The Passover meal, still to this day, happens in a home. It doesn't happen in the synagogue. It happens in the home. And everybody gathers together in that home. The little kids gather around and everything's prepared. And then the father, or the oldest in the home, will then, sometimes will be a grandfather, will then take them through all the symbolism. What the unleavened bread meant, and the bitter herbs, and the lamb, and everything else, and the cups, and so on. And the father, or the oldest male, would take them through, the whole family, take them through that. What do? Now we come to church, drop our kids off, and hope Children's Church do a good job. It's actually more than that. If we want deep roots, you can do that. It's a good thing to do that, by the way. My wife will shoot me for saying that. She loves your children. Please bring them on Sunday. But it starts in the home. If we want to anchor our faith for ourselves, and we want to anchor faith in our children, it starts at home. It starts at home. And what I mean by starting at home is that collectively as a family, we start, first and foremost, worshiping the Lord. Worshiping the Lord. So, what is that? What is the outworking of that? Quite simply, make it a commitment, for example. These are just the Trevor Anderson thoughts, by the way. As I would understand it. If it's not a clear commitment as a family, I'll go and ask your children afterwards. But if it's not a clear understanding as a family, that on Sunday you go to church, I would say you change that. I would say that you change that. The Lord was very clear about the Sabbath. It was a day of rest. It was a day of worship. And the New Testament church, what do? They go, the Jews are worshiping on a Sabbath, so we don't want to mess with that. We'll start on the first day of the week, Sunday, which is why we meet on Sunday. It's not more complicated than that. Okay? Sabbath. It's not more complicated than that. We take Sunday, and Sunday is a day when we rest, and Sunday is a day where we come to give God just an hour and a half of our time to corporately worship Him. So I would say, again, it's a great time of the year, that maybe if your church attendance has been a bit sporadic this year, to say as a family, you know what, we've just a little bit, but that mom and dad have been challenged, and we're going to make this a commitment. And I know, hey, listen, I know when Ross was little, didn't always want to come to church. We always say to him, look, I have to go. I'm employed to go, okay? It's not an option. But you see, if you do it right, train up a child the way they will go. When they are older, they don't depart from it. And so it's not always easy, but it's a commitment. So we're committed to this. This is a value for our family. This is a value for our family. We're doing this together as a family. Let me just say, this puzzles me, and I'm not thinking of anybody in particular. Just say that. I'm surprised at Christians that duck out of Easter and Christmas. That's just me. I'm just saying that. So this is not in the Bible. There's no chapter verse that says you have to come to church on Christmas Day. In fact, there's not even a verse that says that there should be church on Christmas Day. But we go because it's the only two occasions in the whole of the calendar where we come together to honor God on that day for what He did, for coming to earth to rescue sinners like you and me, and then over Easter in His death and resurrection. Surely we can give Him 2 days. 2 days. And I know, I'm not saying that for those Christians who stay at home on Christmas are backsliding or anything like that. But amidst all the festivities, and I know you all do a nice Christmas lunch and so on, could we not give just an hour? Because my pledge to you is always an hour. You know this. We have never gone over a minute on Christmas Day. Because I know the roast is coming. So I get it. Could we not give the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings 1 hour? And on Easter, I know people go away over Easter. So we're not at home and we're not at Lighthouse and that kind of thing. I get that. I understand that. Make an effort. Make an effort. Even if it's just gather together as a family. Break bread on Good Friday. Or remember the death of Jesus Christ. Put on some worship music. Because it's important. Why? Because it builds a foundation. It sends the roots down deep. Honestly, I was dragged off to church on Christmas Day. I mean, when you're little, you don't want to go, but it became part of my being. I don't know what I would do, even to this day, apart from being a pastor. I don't know what I'd do on Christmas Day, just lying around, getting up, and let's go start the lunch early or whatever. No, because when you send down those roots, it's hard then, as you grow up, to deny that, move away from that. Have communion in the home. That's how Jesus did it. They were having a meal with his disciples. He took bread and he broke it. They didn't go to the synagogue and do it. I know we do it in church because then it gets, we all have the opportunity to do it together. But what we could do on top of that is do it at home. Do it at home. It's a great way to model it for your children. It's a great way when they're young to explain to them what it's all about. What it's all about. I know that you trust the children's church leaders to explain it to them, and they do. But even better when it comes from their parents. Even better when you're sitting at home. When you're sitting at home just breaking bread together. So what does Jesus mean to you? What does Jesus mean to you? And on an occasion like that, or any other occasion, take every opportunity to share stories of the faith. To share stories of the faith. To build into, and I'm talking particularly to your children, particularly as husband and wife, share stories of faith. Kim and I always want to share what God is doing in our lives, or what we sensing God is saying to us, and so on. Because although we work at the church, we both work in very different. Most of us we might see each other in the office, but Kim's got stuff to do, and I've got stuff to do. So most of our days are very, very separate, very separate. And we come up together and want to share what God is doing, what God is saying, because it pulls us together. Pulls us together. I remember when Ross was young, we tried family devotions. It just didn't work. So it's like a horror story. So anyway, those of you that I don't know if anybody, Ross does this. So remember, those of you that were here a long, long time ago, you remember Ross had an Indiana Jones face. He came to church dressed as Indiana Jones, outfit and everything. He wasn't allowed to watch the Temple of Doom because that was a bad one, but he could watch the other ones. So Kim finds a children's devotion thing. All it had on, it was nothing to do with Indiana Jones. It just had an Indiana Jones hat on it. And a whip, yeah. So, as parents, sometimes you've got to employ a little bit of deception before the Lord. So I don't know, we showed it to Ross or whatever. He says, Indiana Jones. Yes, Indiana Jones devotional for kids. So we did Indiana Jones devotional. My gosh. In fact, actually, we didn't really do Indiana Jones devotionals. There was a little reading. It wasn't like a devotional book. A little reading, we read that together. So then there was like a story at the end. And I made this mistake of one time sharing like a personal story. I said, one time something similar happened to me. Blah, 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 blah. Big mistake. Because every time after that, so we get to the end, right, Dad, tell me that story in your life. Let me tell you, those were some of the best moments that we shared together. I didn't always have a story. Sometimes I had to make it up. Sorry, Ross. You won't really tell the difference, eh? It just sounded, yeah. You know what? Just to share that we stumbled onto something, and this is the thing. As parents, we stumble onto it. We find what works and what doesn't work for our children, and we stumbled onto something that really, really worked. And for that season in Ross's life growing up, it was just a wonderful thing that we had. Kim and I took turns to just the devotional. I got through as quickly as I could, just to share a story, and then ask questions, and I would pray into that. And those were special times. So we find what works. Find what works in your family, because every family is different. Find what works to anchor your faith in those moments that you do as a family. Like we come to church as a family, and I'd get in the car and go, I want to church, I wish I was at the beach. And I'd drive home bitching and moaning about the sermon and that kind of thing. Do that to me. But don't drive home, because you set an example for your kids. Set an example for your kids. I've heard kids over the years come to me and say, just all the way home, my dad would just moan and groan about the church. This wasn't working, and the aircon, the lights were flickering. And so that was the impression. Don't be like that. Anchor your faith in the things that really matter. For a Jewish family, still to this day, the Passover meal, they gather together. They gather, and they do this every year. Every year they gather together, and the oldest male will lead them through all the way back to what happened in the Exodus. Sadly, they haven't come to the realization of what Jesus has done. But that's what we can do with communion. We can share what Jesus has done for us. Sends the roots down deep. And then lastly, the Feast of Weeks goes on in chapter 16. later from 9/11 that we read earlier, the Feast of Weeks, which happened 49 days after the Passover. They would bring the offering, the grain offering. They would bring the grain offering. And so they would take it to the tabernacle, later the temple. But first of all, it was a whole week celebration. They would cut down the harvest or whatever, and they would bring that together, and they would celebrate. They would celebrate as a family, and then they would take it into the house of the Lord. Celebrate. Celebrate with thanksgiving. We sang about the joy of the Lord earlier this morning. Celebrate those times together. Celebrate with gratitude what God has done. What God has done. Yeah, we live in a moaning world, and there's a lot to moan about. There's a lot to moan about. Okay, we thought we'd do as well in the cricket as we did in the rugby. Moan. And we moan, and we can moan about politics, and we can moan about the country, we can moan about the world. There's so much to moan about. Is moaning your legacy? Are people around you always hearing you moan? Are your children hearing you moan? And I get it. Sometimes we have a bad day and we let off steam, I get it. But there's a better way that requires sometimes discipline and focus and purpose. And that is living with gratitude and thanksgiving. To celebrate the goodness of what God has done, not moaning and groaning about what he hasn't done. To celebrate the grain harvest. And everybody had a slightly different harvest, because it's implied there. According to what you have, according to the blessing you bring in the harvest, to celebrate and give thanks to God for what he has done. For what he has done. That was built into their faith. This was one of the key festivals. 49 days after the Passover, when the harvest was due. And they would come to celebrate together, firstly as a family, and then they would go to bring it to the house of the Lord, where it was then distributed to people in need and so on. Teach and model gratitude. Gratitude. It's a good thing in a marriage. It's a good thing in a marriage. Just sit down and just sometimes date night whenever. Spontaneously, it doesn't matter, just do it. Just express your gratitude to one another, for each other. Just gratitude. What you're thankful for. What you're thankful for. Do it, and do it liberally. Do it liberally. If words aren't your thing, write it down. I mean, if you battle to share it, gentlemen, write it down. Write it down. Any woman here that don't like getting a love letter? Oh, don't put your hand up. If you don't like it, of course you do. So, it's not hard, gentlemen. If you can't say it, write it down. And don't wait till Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is great. Do it as often as you can. Gratitude. Gratitude. When we model gratitude, roots go deep. Because we're grateful. No matter how much we have or don't have, we're grateful to the Lord. You know what our children see? They see faith. They see faith. They see faith. Gratitude. A couple of years ago, I was, I don't know how actually, but I was reading up, thinking about Thanksgiving. It was this time of the year, you know, where the Americans celebrate Thanksgiving. Now I thought I think I know. I mean, I know generally what it was about. I thought, let me just go and fact check that and get my facts straight and just do a little research. So, and we know this. I think most of you have the kind of general knowledge. So the early called pilgrims, they fled religious persecution. So they're mostly Christians that sailed across the Atlantic in the Mayflower, landed in what they called the New World, and they were not to go back. They weren't going back, and so they planted crops and that kind of thing. And the first harvest that they had, interestingly, celebrated with the Native American tribe, I forget their name, but the Native American tribe that was there at the time that helped them work the land. Interesting. Bit of American history that was probably forgotten. Together with the pilgrims, the colonists that they come across, and these Native Americans celebrated what became known as Thanksgiving. It was like this. It was a thankful heart for the harvest. And Americans still do this to this day. I know it's a big pumpkin pie and everything else now, but the roots, in fact, the average American will know the roots of that. They won't necessarily know the whole Christian foundation of it all, but they'll know it was the pilgrims that came across. They were grateful for the harvest and so on. So even in that, and I remember thinking about that. I thought, you know what? Why don't we as a family do that? So this time of the year we have Thanksgiving just as a family, and Ross comes along, and Dave and Bern have joined us for years now. Now the girls come along, and we're just thankful. Just go around the room to say, what are we thankful for in the year that has passed? So it builds a culture of gratitude. and thankfulness. That's what we do. I'm just saying that as an example. Find what works for you. Find what works for you, where you have an opportunity, you have a moment to celebrate the goodness of God, to remember, to be grateful, to be grateful. And listen, I'll tell you what, life is just better when you're grateful. It just is. It's like the antidote to grumpiness. Because if you moan all the time, you're going to be grumpy. Nobody likes being grumpy. And nobody likes being around people that are grumpy. So choose gratitude. Choose gratitude. It's just better. So, let's wrap it up. This is just, a lot of these are just very practical thoughts as to how we can apply the principle that we found throughout Deuteronomy and the law, and just the few that we looked at today, to not only our own lives, but in the lives of others, in the lives of our family and so on, care for others. Care for others. When we do that, the roots go deeper. The foundation is stronger. Anchor your faith. And the few things that we do, anchor your faith. Be committed to doing those things. Come to church on Sunday. It anchors you, and it anchors your children. It's important. Have communion at home, all the things we spoke about. And lastly, celebrate together. Celebrate together. Whether it's once a year, a lot of these things for the Jews were once a year, once every 7 years. It doesn't matter so long as you do it. And here's the key. Here's the key. The thing that struck me just looking at this was a lot of this happened in the family, not in the church. The church can add to that, but it starts with the family. If you're on your own, it could be you and a few friends, your family, if it's just you and your husband, or you and your wife, just the two of you. If you've got children still at home, as a family, it starts there. It starts there. The church does not have a program for everything, nor should it. Faith always begins in the home. It just does. In your heart and then the home. And so it's like a family thing that we miss if we just overlook it. Guys, all the Old Testament stuff. But the principle behind this, as I've shown you today, and the practical suggestions of mine, however it works for you. Here's the thing. This is all good and well, unless it's applied. It's all good and well. I don't think any of you I didn't see anybody shaking your head. No, Trevor, gratitude's not a good thing. No, we know this. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen unless you plan for it. You know the age-old story, losing weight, getting fit, whatever it is. There's only one difference between the guy who gets fitter and the guy who doesn't, when they both want it. The one guy gets up at 5:30 in the morning to go to gym. The other rolls over and goes to sleep and switches off the alarm. Puts it on snooze. Both had the best of intentions to do so. So, all the plans mean nothing unless you prepare to act on it and build into your life, into your marriage, into your family life, roots, foundations that build strength and build faith. Does that make sense? So, as this year draws to a close, I want to challenge you. Take some time. Firstly, yourself, maybe with your partner, your family, and say, what are we going to do differently? What do we go differently? If we want to build roots, strong faith. We want a strong faith. I don't want a faith that's flimsy. What do we need to change maybe? Our church attendance was a bit sporadic this year. Next year, Sunday is for church. We're coming together to worship the Lord. Don't do it for me. You do it for Him. Do it for Him. And for the reasons that I've given you today. Have communion at home. It's not a scary thing. You've seen it. You've had it many, many times in church. Just do that at home. Do it at home. Have a form, whatever you want to do, of gratitude. It might be on a birthday. It might be, take a day where you just celebrate together. Thank God for His goodness in your life. Look for opportunities where you as a family can do something for the needy. Something for somebody less fortunate. It might even be the domestic worker that works for you, or the gardener that comes and cleans your garden. So make any opportunity that you have that you can model not only for yourself, but for your children. Build that faith. Send down deep roots. Build on a solid foundation. And sometimes it is about doing the things and being intentional about them and following through with them. Because over time, they add up. Over time, they add up. As I said to you, for me, if I grew up and I had the opportunity not to go to church on Christmas Day, I wouldn't know what to do. I'd feel weird the whole day because that's what we always did. That's what we did. And you think about it. What would it take for you to walk away from the faith now? Because your whole life has been built on these things. Every Sunday we're in a church, and we did this, and we're part of a community group, and we served here, and we served there. That builds something that lasts. That builds something that the enemy can't destroy. That builds something that makes a difference so that we don't become part of that statistic that I shared with you at the beginning. Amen?